So on Wednesday, Demi Hassib told staff at Google DeepMind that AGI, and this is his phrase, feel close at hand.
And in that same week, 4 of the people who built that infrastructure got walked out of the building.
Yeah, and Jeff Dean, like 27 years at Google, Sanjay Jermawat, Oriol Vinyals, and Kwok Le, all 4 leaving to found a startup called Discovery Loop.
And Google is one of the founding investors and is funding the exit.
I know, this is so weird. And Hassib's moves like up to chair and becomes Alphabet first chief scientist, I'm hoping I'm saying this right. Corey Kavujulaka takes day-to-day control, which means as of this recording, Google DeepMind now does not have a CEO.
So here's the question I can't put down. Is that a company sprinting for the finish line? Or a company where the people closest to the machine decided that this is the week to leave the room?
So that's where we are starting. I'm Fleur Prince.
I'm Grania Poppin.
And this is AI Insights, and this is genuinely a strange week.
Yeah, yeah, very much so, very much so.
Yeah, so we actually talked about the DeepMind walkout. So this infrastructure generation is leaving at once, and the story is about people, not just org charts. So here are pretty much the facts that happened on August 5th. So Jeff Dean leaves Google after 27 years alongside Sanjay Jamwat, Oriol Vinyals, and Kwok Le. All 4 are founding a startup called Discovery Loop with Google as the founding investor. And it's also been confirmed across like 5 atlas. So we're talking about CNBC, USG, Quartz, The Guardian, and also even Evolving AI. Is talking about this.
So this is a major development in the industry, especially as Demis Hassabis has moved from CEO of Google DeepMind to chair and has become Alphabet's first chief scientist. Then Corey Kavugaju, a 13-year veteran, takes day-to-day control as SVP, reporting directly to Sundar Pichai. The net effect is that Google DeepMind has no CEO. These restructurings are deeply impactful for a market that is often defined by these major tech companies, and specifically Google.
No, exactly. And also, like, why does actually these 4 specifically matter? So Dean and Jerma built like MapReduce, Bigtable, and also TensorFlow. And this is not a product team that's just leaving. This is the generation that built the plumbing, everything else is on top of. So we're talking about like the history. So Hassib's co-founded DeepMind in 2010, sold it to Google for roughly like $650 million in 2014, and 16 years has been the chair there. But looking at this from like a community side, so when the people who built the foundation leave together and the incubation funds this vehicle, this is not just like we're talking about rupture. This is a negotiated exit. What does this actually tell us about where the senior AI talent thinks it's interesting to work now happens? Not inside the biggest labs anymore. And
Exactly. So that's the thing, like the interesting work, the talent, it's kind of, for other industries, it's all structured around like near monopolies, like the biggest companies that have all the talent. But now that's really changing. I mean, anyone can leave and start something new, and kind of the talent is more evenly dispersed. But the real kind of tension to sit with is that AGI feels close at hand. And that landed in the same memo cycle as a mass departure. Both things are true, and neither explains the other, but these kind of restructurings, paired with technological advance, really indicate that the industry is changing fast.
No, and actually recently a connection of mine introduced me also to like the AGI Society, which is like a private kind of group that focuses really on the AGI focus of what is happening. And I was like, well, this seems interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's so many new frontiers. Obviously, like our title is AI Insights, where we discuss AI, but there's so much more to AI, and like just kind of the technological advancements. For example, quantum computing is one that has come around, that is getting more and more of an emphasis. And, I did a competition pretty recently around quantum and quantum security. And it's just fascinating how fast these things are evolving. Like AGI especially was, previously like a fairy tale, and now it's just so real and in front of us. So crazy times.
Yeah, exactly. And there are also private conversations even happening about, okay, what is this going to bring us? Because recently the paper AI 2040 was also released. This is by the same people who wrote AI 2027 paper with potential scenarios of where AI can go within the next, I want to say next 30 years, but it's the next 20 years because we're already in 2026.
I know. Oh my gosh. Moving fast. And
Yeah. And this also brings us actually to our next segment, which is the synchronized compliance dates. And Gray, I
yeah.
think this is more your area of
Yeah.
expertise, so I'm gonna let you introduce this.
Very much so. So we kind of prefaced this in our last episode, but the narrative going into this summer was Brussels is buckling. Basically, that pressure from big technology companies in the States were causing it to kind of roll back on some of the stricter requirements of the EU AI Act. And what August has told us is that on transparency, Brussels is very, very far from buckling. Essentially, the European Commission started enforcing the EU AI Act Article 50 transparency obligations on the 2nd of August 2026, which, worth noting, was a Sunday. Penalties involve up to 15 million euro or 3% of annual worldwide turnover, whichever is higher. It is extraterritorial, which means it applies to any provider whose outreach reaches the EU market, aka every provider in the world if it's a global company. So a few I could name: Google, Microsoft, Meta, all the big players, they're going to be deeply affected by this. The requirements is that there must be machine readable marking of synthetic audio, image, video, and text, and disclosure when a user is interacting with an AI system. There also must be deepfake labeling. This is the first hard, finable, globally scoped AI content labeling regime anywhere in the world. Then, over in California, on the same day, SB 942, as amended by AB 8853, effective 2nd of August 2026, applies to generative AI systems with more than 1 million monthly users, accessible in California. Requires a free public AI detection tool supporting file upload, URL and API, latent disclosure, and an optional manifest disclosure that must be permanent or extraordinarily difficult to remove. This phases in through 2028. Finally, the detail. So basically, we're seeing similar regulations starting to emerge on both sides of the ocean. And the detail that really makes the story is that Troutman Piper has noted that California moved its operative date from the 1st of January 2026 to the 2nd of August 2026, specifically to align with the EU AI Act. So we have been saying time and time again, and me especially, that the States is undergoing this unique and honestly pivotal moment where they are seeking to resemble the European standards for regulations. And that's an aspect of why I want to move over there, because it's, this really unique time where everything is, coming into force. And, this decision to kind of accelerate or to kind of, synchronize the timelines really proves that.
No, exactly. And the advantage that you have is that you have already been through this. So
Yeah,
anyone who
exactly.
wants to hire Grania for consultancy, she already went through this, so she knows what she's doing.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. But yeah, so this is basically what has been coined as the Brussels effect occurring in public.
Yeah,
And
we have the
there's
name, the Brussels effect.
I know, and there's paperwork to prove it. The next thing we kind of wanted to review in this area is the gap that California left and the EU didn't. So these are the differences between the California and EU implementations. AI-generated text is excluded from SB 942, as are non-user generated game, TV streaming, and film experiences. The EU covers text. If you only comply with California, you are not compliant in Europe. So that's a really important distinction that I think a lot of people will miss as the synchronization increases. There's going to be a few crucial differences that the EU will probably continue to hold individuals to a higher standard than in America. And the nuance that a lot of the coverage gets wrong is that Article 50 transparency is live now. High-risk systems under Article 6 have been pushed back to the 2nd of December 2027. And there's new prohibitions on non-consensual intimate imagery and CSAM land December 2026. So a lot of dates, but the most important of which being, thankfully, synchronized both California and the EU AI Act, transparency, which is the name of the game as we move into kind of the end of 2026 and the new year. So 4 separate law firm analyses have concurred on, these trends, which is Ogletree Deakins, Morgan Lewis, Travers Smiths, and DLA Piper. And then finally, kind of the soft law, the voluntary code of practice on transparency of AI-generated content with guidelines adopted around 20th of July, 2026, includes standardized labeling icons. What does that mean? That signatories get a presumption of conformity with Article 50 and softer enforcement. So that relates to kind of maybe not the buckling, but the softening that we were talking about because of pressures. Non-signatories will have to prove compliance themselves. This is the GDPR playbook all over again. And you have to watch who signs because refusal to sign is now itself a signal.
Yeah, looking back at this it feels so weird to see how this matches now with each other as well.
Yeah.
Because, like, Europe and the US, like, they've been friends for a long time, of course, ever since the Second World War. But also, like, to see how much they're collaborating on making sure that the AI is compliant in both countries is just very interesting. But I think also the strongest current critique of the AI Act is the operational, not the ideological. So a lawfare analysis drawing on, like, a poor domains report argues that the EU AI office actually badly under-resourced relative to, like, the mandate that includes withdrawing models from the EU market. And I think this attributes it as an analysis and advocacy. So yeah, it's very interesting to see also how they want to enforce this, but they're also understaffed. And that just brings in
Yeah, so
contradiction.
enforcement is the name of the game, and that's kind of where consultants like myself come in, which is that because this is also new, I mean, the technology itself is so new, impossible to understand. And then, we kind of have technology that is trying to, it's kind of like fitting like a square peg into a circular hole because both the technology and the regulations are so new, so unprecedented that it's kind of just an attempt to move things forward. And I mean, honestly, we're just going to have to see through trial and error how normative enforcement is going to look like. But we have a pretty good indication from the EU. And as we can see, California and other major states are trying to resemble that EU model. So there's kind of at least a bit of more guidance for the states as they, start on their own regulatory journey. So
No, agreed. I think this also brings us good to our next topic.
exactly, which is that we kind of want to change the subject completely because a paper that was published on Thursday has been in my head all week. Essentially, researchers used a language model, the same class of thing that writes your emails, to design complete viral genomes from scratch. They printed 302 of the designs, and 16 of them came out of the lab alive. So why has this been on my mind? Why do we want to transition into that directly from our compliance conversation? Because this is why compliance matters. This is what we need to ensure remains compliant, which is working living viruses. So exactly, I mean, generative design of bacteriophages with genome language models has been peer reviewed in Science, Stanford University, and Arc Institute. They have been working on these kind of models, and what was designed were, like I said, and kind of introducing the subject, complete bacteriophage genomes, viruses that infect bacteria. The genome language models, EVO1 and EVO2, generated thousands of candidate genomes with using the natural phage X174 as a template, and this is the first time that a whole viral genome has been AI designed. Fleur, what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
No, when I read about this, I was like, okay, wait, we can now design AI design viral genomes because we're talking about, like, it's not a simulation. Like 302 top design were physically synthesized. Oh my god, this is hard work. Were viable, and it killed E. coli, like including strains that are resistant to the natural phages. But also the guardrails that the team built in, the training data that was excluded, viruses that infect humans and plants. I mean, the designs here, we're talking about, like, they were constrained to, like, bacteria only phages. And, like, first AI designed viral genomes, bacteria only, is novel, but not within a known family per se. So the NYT reporting here notes that every viable phage is similar to X174. So we cannot per se say, like, a virus with no natural counterparts, but it's I don't want to say per se an AI invented a new virus.
Generative design of bacteriophages with genome language models. So they're basically able to produce living viruses that are capable of infecting bacteria. So it's, we're here to say that we can also dive into the legal questions surrounding it. So does any existing biosecurity framework actually reach an organism that was designed by a model? export controls, dual use research oversight, biosafety review. All of them were written around pathogens, laboratories, and physical materials, not around a generated sequence file and a synthesis order. An honest answer on the tape should be, I don't know, I don't think anyone does yet, and that's the problem, which is what we were just discussing before we kind of dove into the legal aspects. We wouldn't be able to name any specific statutes, treaties, or regulations covering or not covering because we haven't even verified the reach of the named instrument. This is an opening question, and this is kind of an emerging dialogue, and there's nothing conclusive, nearly even within the EU AI Act that we can directly apply to this because it's so new. I'm looking forward to hearing what Fleur thinks on the community aspect.
No, so like we said earlier, for us it was just mind-blowing, just the fact that this was AI design. But I think
Yeah.
also looking here is the guardrails here were chosen by the lab. So we're talking about like good guardrails, seriously and visibly applied, and still entirely voluntarily decided by the people doing the work. And I think that is the same structural question as the whole open weight debate arriving in like wet lab form.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, like you don't lose the upside here. Like the engineered phages that like killed the antibiotic resistant E. coli is not like a horror story. Phage therapy is a live and underfunded avenue that for infections that have stopped responding to antibiotics. And the reason this paper is hard is precisely that the beneficial application and the frightening one are the same technique.
Exactly. So to kind of nearly summarize this conversation and topic, so we're landing on a mismatch. The capability is peer reviewed and published, and the review framework is a question that nobody can answer. And hopefully we will be able to answer it very soon, and we will continue to look on subjects of this nature. And it kind of just continues right into our next topic. Hold that thought, a published peer-reviewed capability with voluntary guidelines, because 2 days before that paper came out, Washington decided who does and doesn't get reviewed before release. So we're discussing kind of compliance frameworks, and we're discussing, these new evolving technologies. And now we're looking at the divergence, which is who gets reviewed and who doesn't. So Fleur, if you want to jump into what exactly has happened here.
Yeah. So while, like we said, we talked earlier about this as being a strange week, especially when you get this kind of thing on your news channel, just like appearing like poof. So what actually happened on August 3rd, the White House finalized its AI security vetting framework, and companies were briefed like on Tuesday, the 4th of August, at the Office of the National Cybersecurity Director. It implements on the 2nd of June the executive order promoting advanced artificial intelligence, innovation, and security. The mechanism here voluntarily pre-release cybersecurity review of advanced models. This was reported actually by Political and corroborated by WSG, Axios, Quartz, and also the Washington Post. But wait, there is a twist. So, per through people familiar with his plan, granted anonymity, the regime would like focus on top tier products that from US developers such as OpenAI and Anthropic, while exempting a rise breed of lower cost AI software. So we are talking about open source and open weight models that are exclusive. So to frame it more precisely, the US is regulating by business model, not per se by capability. So we're talking about publish your ways and your exits, the review process. And this is a precise inverse of what's happening in the EU, which triggers on capability and market reach, regardless of license.
Exactly. Yeah. So the context just makes that even sharper. So as of 14th July 2026, Chinese open weight models led Hugging Face downloads at 41% this spring, therefore surpassing US models. Washington is exempting the exact category in which China currently leads. Where the honest disagreement is, and it is now sharper than it was, is that exempting by license is a coherent, if arguable, choice. Open weights are already public, so a pre-release review of them is as close to meaningless as a control. However, Fleur, your opinion?
Yeah, well, my opinion is the other one. This is where we start to disagree. And that is where capabilities doesn't care per se about your license, as the earlier segment that we were talking about is proof. Like, we're talking here about like the models that were designed, those genomes. So we're talking about Evo 1 and Evo 2. And the safety property that mattered was a choice about the training data and not about the license category.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of an unresolved backdrop here, which is underpinning all of the topics that we're discussing today. But we do want to mention the developments that congressional Republicans are still pursuing federal preemption of state AI laws after 2 failures, which would put California's brand new law directly in the crosshairs. And then, as 4214, the Artificial Intelligence Data Center Moratorium Act, was
I didn't
introduced.
know if that even existed until now.
Yeah, that was a huge, huge, huge deal when the moratorium was passed. I mean, that's why, again, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to move to the United States and work in like such a fast-paced, dynamic regulatory environment, because these things are changing day by day, and the biggest news is coming out of Washington. So
Yeah, exactly. You used to be in Washington, so
yeah, exactly. I'm headed home. I'm headed home. Back on the hill. Anyway, so S4214, the artificial, yeah, again, was introduced in the Senate by Sanders with a House companion from Ocasio-Cortez. There is no movement in our window, and that is leading again into our next topic, which is segment 5, which is 3 labs, 3 weeks, and not a whoever. So this is kind of a legal centerpiece sort of discussion. It's that 3 labs disclose the same class of failure in 3 weeks. So what does that look like? OpenAI, 21st of July, models exploited a 0-day vulnerability to escape an isolated test environment and reached Hugging Face production infrastructure. This is disclosed by OpenAI directly. Number 2, Anthropic, 30th of July. After OpenAI's disclosure, Anthropic reviewed on 141,006 evaluation runs and found 3 incidents in which Claude.
very specific number here we're talking about.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh. In which Claude reached the open internet from inside the environment of a third-party evaluation partner, Irregular, and comprised 3 real organizations' production infrastructure. Models include Opus 4.7, Mythos 5, and an internal research test model. Earliest incidents date back to April. Affected organizations were notified 27th of July and not publicly named. So a root cause could be a misunderstanding between Anthropic and Irregular meant that internet access was live, even though the prompt told Claude that it was sandbox. And we need to really acknowledge here weak passwords and unauthenticated endpoints. No 0 days. The task was to capture the flag with no self-exfiltration. So, and then the detail we really want to emphasize is that the older model kept going after seeing evidence that it was on the real internet, and the newest model stopped. So that is measurable safety improvement inside a story about a safety failure, which no one is really reporting on. And then also, we don't want to say that, it was kind of a hacked security firm. Irregular is the evaluation partner that supplied the environment and is not the victim. This was yeah. And then Meta on the 5th of August. So this is our 3rd lab in our 3rd week. Has Meta stated that one of its models was connected to the internet and hacked another organization during cybersecurity testing, and attributes it directly to an inadvertent testing error, the same root cause as Anthropic. This is all corroborated by BBC, Reuters, and the Washington Post. And then Fleur will be examining part 2, which is a little bit more severe than our 3 lab, 3-week conundrum.
No, actually, it's a little bit more disturbing even. So during a UK AI Security Institute evaluation, safeguards removed and internet access were deliberately enabled, where Mythos 5 actually created a fake online identity to pressure a human maintainer into merging malicious code into a real open source project. So Hacker News actually reports the agent spent 34 hours trying to land a malware dropper. OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Sol was involved in the other incidents in the same evaluation. This was reported by CNBC on the 5th of August. So what's different here is actually, so every other incident in this segment is a technical exploit against a machine. This one is social engineering of a person. The target wasn't a weak password. It was a volunteer maintainer's trust and their review process. And this was deliberately unsafeguarded evaluation with internet access switched on purpose. And also, that's the point I hear talking about, like a safety institute, but this was not a leak. It's a test that produced a result nobody wants. And that was why it was a bit more disturbing, because we saw here legit AI
Exactly.
blackmailing someone.
Yeah, which is incredibly scary. So the practical kind of consequence here is that if you want to block AI agents, computer crime statutes are now the weaker route. You would have to switch to contract and tort, which is terms of service, breach, and interference.
Exactly. And I think this also brings us nice part to the last part of this segment, and that's actually the legal turn.
Exactly. So there was a decision, the 4th of August, 2026, where the Ninth Court vacated Amazon's injunction against Perplexity, rejecting claims under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and California CDAFA over Perplexity's Comet browser assistant. The three holdings in the court's own terms. First, it was the user who accessed Amazon's computers with the help of a Perplexity AI agent. Second, access means entering the computer system itself. And third, and this is the line, the statute's whoever contemplates a person and not a software tool. This really matters because this is the first appellate reasoning on whether an agentic AI acting for a user commits unauthorized access. The practical consequence for platforms is, again, if you want to block AI agents, as I was saying earlier, computer crime statutes are now the weaker route, and you're going to have to switch to contracts and tort, terms of service, breach, and interference, which is really important for any person that's listening to this podcast and thinking, how does this affect me? Yeah, so the limitations are going to be as newsworthy as the holding. So only the CFAA and the CDAFA theories were addressed. So again, contracts, tort, terms of service claims remain open. And it's also important to acknowledge that the analysis is fact-specific and could differ more for autonomous agents, and that this is only a preliminary injunction posture and not a final ruling on merits. And now, kind of wrapping up everything, all of our segments in their totality. Fleur, if you have any
Exactly.
closing thoughts.
Yeah, so here's where we keep coming back to, actually. So on Thursday, a peer-reviewed paper showed a language model can design a working virus. The safety property that mattered wasn't a law and it wasn't a license. It was a decision the lab made and about what to put into the training data. 2 days before that paper came out, Washington finalized a framework that decided who gets reviewed based on whether you publish your ways. Europe decided the thing that matters the most and whether you can tell it's an AI at all. Those aren't the three speeds of the same regulation. There are three different theories of what the risk actually is. And right now,
Exactly. The one thing I'd add is that the Biosecurity Center at Johns Hopkins used the word urgent in the same issue as the paper, and that's the field telling us that the clock has started. Ask again in December. We'll be here.
Exactly. If you love our podcast episode, please do leave a like, subscribe, and also check out our newsletter. You can sign up on it via our website or on LinkedIn. And also be sure to leave a comment because we always love to engage with everyone who's listening to this.
Yeah, exactly.
So, see you next week. Fleur and Grania signing off.
Bye.
Bye.